Hello everyone, and welcome to our Saturday Easter Vigil this year. As we said last year, there is a great ancient tradition where they would read the entire scriptures on Easter Vigil. And after they'd read the scriptures, they actually would continue the story. They would talk about all the lives that came after that, all the ways that people had affected faith, talk about their community around them, and how God had been present. Because the reality is that the story didn't end in the scriptures. Instead, the story keeps on going on for all eternity. So today, we'll be sharing some of those stories. I have a few, and then also our music director, Sean Michael Jackman, also has a presentation today as well. But I want to start towards the beginning with Abraham. Abraham, who really had to trust God, had to trust that God was going to lead him in the right directions. It takes a lot of faith to hear God say, you move away from your people. Move away from everything that you know and go. Go to a new land far from home. And Abraham went. Now, Abraham did make mistakes along the way. And some of them today we see as pretty unforgivable. And once, as Abraham aged, he was afraid as well. And he wasn't always the most trusting. But that's all of us, right? All of us have moments of time where we just don't quite understand, we doubt, we act out. We try to make sure things happen on our timetable. But even in that, God remained faithful, and God kept God's promises. That's important to remember, that no matter what we do, God continues to work in us and through us. We had Moses. Moses, who you can see as my little statue over there. Moses, who even from his very birth was someone who had to trust in God, as he floated along that river in his basket and found his way to Pharaoh's daughter. Moses, who escaped into the wilderness, but was led back by God to face down a Pharaoh and to free his people, alongside his brother Aaron, who was really the mouthpiece of the organization, and Miriam, his sister, who inspired him, who sang songs we still have today, without whom, who knows what would have happened. All three examples of faith. And Aaron, when he helped make the golden bull, perhaps also fell short. And yet, God continued to work through Aaron after that. And you keep going in scriptures to Mary, who decided that she would follow God into giving birth to a child, the child of God, who, even though she wasn't wed yet, even though that could actually destroy the marriage she's supposed to be going into, it could destroy her whole status in society, it could leave her homeless, she still said yes. I am your humble servant, and I will follow. I will do as you desire. And amazingly, so far, I might be the only one who did so without any great mistrust times, who simply did what God desired. We go to St. Stephen, who was one of our first martyrs, who stood before the people and said, "This is who God is, whether you like it or not. This is who the person of Christ is, who has been promised to us from all the generations, and who was stoned to death for proclaiming the good news of God." Again, what faith it must take to continue to proclaim even when we know it will lead to the ultimate sacrifice. But yet he did. And today he's remembered. I think about Clement of Alexandria. Now we're getting out of biblical times. But Clement, a theologian who had a really different idea, which was that God had been speaking to the Greeks. He had been speaking to the Greeks not through the prophets like they were used to, but through philosophy. That God knew how the Greeks thought, that God understood them and decided that, really the best way to reach these people is through philosophy. And so Clement would try to merge philosophy of Plato and Aristotle and merge it with God's word, through the word of the prophets, to show that God had been speaking to all people in maybe different ways, but ultimately God was the God of all. And God was going to reach them as was needed. This isn't always the most embraced idea. Even though we know that we use in the Psalms, we use schemes and formats from the Egyptian heritage. And we'll use, different mass market things in order to proclaim the good news. But instead of just using others' ideas as a way of embracing that God has been speaking to everyone. That while we may be the particularly blessed that had the prophets, well, not we in Europe or in America, but our heritage, we have the prophets. We have Christ. And Christ is the one that everything is supposed to point to. It is the greatest truth that God is here for us through Christ, as through Christ that we are saved. But maybe we're all prepared for that in all these different ways. It's a conversation that we still have today. But Clement started all those years ago. There's Christina of Marquiat. Now, Christina believed that she'd been given the gift of chastity, that she was going to spend her life serving God and not giving herself to anyone else. And Christina's problem was not this, but rather it was how unaccepted it was by her family. Because after all, who would want to marry a woman who was being chased their entire life? And they wanted to marry her off to someone. And so they did. Even though she protested, even though she made very clear this was not going to work out, they still married her off. And when she was married, she continued her vow of chastity, which her husband wasn't always the happiest about. The point that she would hide, she would fight. At one point, she even is clinging by her fingernails from the top of her bedposts, hiding, as her husband drunkenly came in with all of his friends. Eventually, Christina escaped from this. And she went off and joined with a monk. And other women followed her. And eventually, she ends up writing about faith and is listened to. And she becomes a leader to all these women who come and join her. So while she's not a name that we always know of today, she is an example of even when the world around us is telling us that we are wrong. Even when we have pressure from family and from friends, we can still follow God first. That God will be with us and guide us. That God will lead us and protect us. She kept her vow her entire life. She's an example of strength, of hope. And she went on to influence many through her writings and her leadership. And then we have Luther, from whom we've taken our name, who he changed the world. Again, even when told not to, even when the Pope is saying it's okay to kill him, he continued to speak out. He continued to point out hypocrisy in our faith. He continued to help us to grow and to learn and to believe that everyone had the opportunity to read the scriptures in their own language so we can learn and grow. There's continuing calling for us to never think that we knew enough, to not just accept the least, but instead to embrace growth, to embrace that God continues to be present and life-changing, and that God is the one who has all the power, not any human authority, although these authorities are given to us as a blessing according to Luther. But rather, it is God to whom we owe ultimate allegiance. It is God who saves all of us out of pure love, not out of a reward because we deserved it, but instead loves us completely, which is a message that we all need so desperately. That even at our lowest, God still loves us. That God forgives us purely out of that love. Now we're about to enter into our present day. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Sean Michael Jackman as he tells us through a slide presentation about the gift of his grandfather. Thank you, Sean Michael, for sharing about your grandfather. And now we'll be hearing from Linda Oswald as she talks about her journey of faith, walking alongside her co-workers.
Hi. What I would like to say about the faith journey, in my experience, my faith was magnified in having a discussion with a Lebanese co-worker friend of mine at the Old Sinai Hospital. He was experiencing and reading the Bible, and he had lots of questions. And so in our discussion, in my answering his questions, the journey of faith became very obvious to me. and the things that make me Christian, that make me believe in Jesus, and the life-giving experiences that explained to him as he was reading the Bible and trying to understand what it is that is being said to him. And I really appreciated that effort on our part to discuss and in depth the meaning of being a Christian and what our faith is.
For showing us that it's not always those who are seen as powerful, who have all this great status and everything else, but it is the everyday people that have affected our lives. I have a few more from present day. People who have been parts of my life. First, I think all the bishops that I've had the honor of working with. With Bishop Don McCoy, who was the bishop when I was going through candidacy, who approved me being able to come to seminary and become a pastor. I've told the story before about how, I first went through candidacy and I got denied. I had to take a year off. And it was Bishop McCoy who helped me going to the next set of interviews, helped guide me along the way, someone who showed love and grace and patience. After he retired from being our bishop in Southwest PA, he ended up working for Churchwide, working with our Catholic brothers and sisters, our siblings, and we try to find commonalities between us to work together. I know Bishop Eaton, who was my first bishop as a pastor, who she never pretended to be someone she wasn't. She was fully herself, and it showed, and it reminded me that God calls us as individuals, not as cookie cutters. That God calls us and leads us to be us, to be the ones that God has made us to be. And of course, she would leave us in Northeast Ohio, become our presiding bishop of the ELCA, but she still is. And Bishop Abraham Allende would come in. Bishop who was just so full of knowledge, of experience, who had been a sportscaster before he became a pastor, and showed that no matter where we are in life, no matter our age or anything else, we have plenty to give. We have plenty to help people to grow. That at different times in our lives we'll be called to do different things. And that can change. I believe he was called by God to be a sportscaster. He was called by God to become a pastor, and called by God to be a bishop. And now he's called to be retired. And through all of it, God was present and acting through him. And now we have Bishop Don Chris, one of my predecessors here. Bishop Chris, who is an inspiration as a leader who has vision for our synod, who sees possibilities when it can be so easy to see despair, who sees hope for all of us. It's a blessing to have him as our bishop and to see the ways of possibility. Another person I want to talk about is someone who's probably going to be embarrassed that I'm doing this. One of our current members of this congregation, Rebecca Parker. who has continued to inspire me during these times of COVID. You see, it was her idea to start our blessings box, where people could come from around our community to get what they need, whether it be toilet paper or cleaning supplies or toothbrushes or anything else. She saw a need around us and saw a way for us to be good neighbors. In the midst of trial, in the midst of tribulation for all of us, she could see need and came and said, we need to do this. And I said, you're right. And it's her idea as well, got us going to collect as much as we have for our family at North High School, to further embrace our community around us, to inspire us to see beyond ourselves. Truly, she is someone who God is using every day, wherever she meets. Help them to see possibilities as well, to help us to see beyond ourselves and to see God present in the world around us. So looking back from the very beginning of time to now, God has been present. God has been leading us. And God has never abandoned us or broken God's promises. For that, may we give thanks to God as we wait patiently today for Easter, for the resurrection of Christ, the sign that all of us are saved by God, that death and sin have lost their sting, and ultimately God wins. Thanks be to God. Thank you for joining us tonight. Peace be with you. Amen.